Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at a more nuanced style of economic system. Remember, a economic system is a method used by society to decide how to produce and distribute goods and services, and how systemically, as a group, as a society, we deal with the concepts of scarcity. Remember, the last time we took a look at a free market system. There's no government interference. Businesses and households engage in the factor market and product market. You exchange land, labor, capital for mainly wages, income, and then in the product market, it's money for goods and services. But of course, we don't exist in a laissez faire free market system. In fact, most places in the world, there's no country in the world that does. Instead, they are levels of a mixed economic system. So today, we're going to take a look at neoliberalism, welfare capitalism, market socialism, and actual socialism. Um, the middle three here are considered mixed economies. Socialism is straight command. All right. So this is what a government, when we add a government to circular flow, then we have a mixed style circular flow system, because the government is a part of the process. From households and businesses, government takes taxes, and then from the resource market, you have factors of production to go to government. And of course, from the product market, you have goods and services that go to the government. But what the government does is it takes money from households and businesses and turns around and says, okay, we're going to buy your land, labor, and capital, or okay, we're going to buy your product. And and then they create programs from doing that as well to help out households and to help out businesses. All right, so let's do some examples. First of all, we have two different sectors in a mixed economy. One is a private sector where the economy is ran by households and firms, and one is the public sector. It's the part of the economy that's actually run by the government, where the government makes the decisions. And this is what a simple circular flow graph would look like. In the middle, we have the government, the public sector, we have the private sector, businesses, and households in most economic societies. Now, the government doesn't make anything. They need to buy their police cars, their pencils, their military equipment, their uniforms, their airplanes, their roads, bridges, tools, whatever. And so what the government does is the government goes to businesses, it gets money from taxes, and then it creates an exchange. In exchange for that money from taxes it gets from businesses and households, it goes to businesses, the product market, and buys cars, tools, lights for traffic lights themselves, bridges, signage, all those things that the government, remember, doesn't make anything. And they do that in exchange for, of course, tax money. All right. And remember, the government really only gets most of its money from two places. One, it borrows, and two, it gets taxes from households and businesses. There are other things like fees and that kind of thing, and money that it invests in other economies, but that's very small in comparison. It's mainly taxes and borrowing. The government also makes an exchange in the resource market. Remember, police officers, members of the military, members of the federal, state, and local government, teachers. I work for the public sector, and they take some of that tax money and exchange that tax money in the resource market for factors of production, mainly things like labor. All right. And so that labor does work, and and that's part of government. So again, we would take these two things represent taxes, or obviously money that is loaned in exchange for goods and services down here, and land, labor, capital, primarily labor up here. Okay. Now, there are all kinds of different things that are done for households and um, businesses in terms of the public sector. Schools, firefighters, Medicare, uh, the military protects its citizens, Social Security and safety nets. A lot of these go towards households. Schools obviously impact also businesses as well. But things like subsidies, universities provide talent, roads and bridges, air traffic control towers, research, pandemic loans, police and parks, and all those help make businesses and communities better. So the public sector clearly has a role in the economy in doing these things, but we got to remember that it is different than having a private sector exchange. So now Where does this fit on mixed economies? Well, we move from laissez-faire and we move into neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is when the government essentially works to protect private property and to make the market exchanges between households and businesses more efficient. Okay. Also, a lot of government in a neoliberal style economy promotes the idea of free trade, free exchange, not only between countries, but within countries and within states as well. Uh, and probably the main thing that the public sector tries to do is correct market failures. When like a monopoly comes up, you got to break it apart because that prevents competition. When there's a massive imbalance of inequality, that's usually due because of the failure of a market. And so you would try to work to address that market failure. So when you have a neoliberal, and people look at neoliberalism as being extremely liberal from the new school. No, neoliberal is the idea of you have a government focused on promoting the ideas of free markets. The government exists to essentially make businesses and households making exchanges better. So, neoliberal countries would include the United States, Mexico, and Nigeria in the AP6 plus the US. The United Kingdom is kind of on the cusp of being more a little neoliberal and more of the next one, which is welfare capitalism. Okay, welfare capitalism is when government takes it a step farther in its control, and it actually actively goes out there and strongly regulates businesses to basically take the money from those businesses and provide greater household safety nets. And those can be fairly robust and fairly strong. But a lot of where they get their money is from an increased taxation on that private sector business. Okay, so essentially, the role of welfare capitalist societies is to increase regulation on these guys. Then it creates a greater egalitarian society because that money or in that effort and that capital is transferred over to safety nets for households. And safety nets, of course, are things that is help for households and businesses in dire economic situations. Okay. The United Kingdom is very much a welfare capitalist society. So is Iran, but Iran says it is, and then in practice, it's really poorly done. A lot of it's because it's a pretty poor country, so they can't pay for safety nets. Remember, the safety net money either comes from loaning, which you can only do to a limited amount, especially if you're a country they don't trust, and or taxation from households and businesses. And if your households and businesses are poor, then the taxation really isn't going to work in being able to create stronger safety nets because you do need an income stream to come from somewhere. And you can only tap businesses so much. You can tax rich people all you want. That's not going to be enough usually to hold up robust safety nets for any kind of society. Right? Most of your Western European countries would be also be considered welfare capitalist, as like a place like Australia, and Canada is a little more neoliberal. When we start moving even farther over, we have market socialism. In this case, the government essentially owns essential factors of production for the running of society. Essential. So the private sector on the business side becomes much more run by the government. Private workers, like things like trade unions, business co-ops, they actively are a part of the decision making of a lot of the businesses. Like you'll have members of the workers actually on the board of directors influencing decision making or members of the majority party. And profits are often forcibly spread out into society at a greater amount. This is Russia and China, sort of. And remember, in this style of economic system, there is massive regulation on business that basically makes it an arm of the government, and then the government decides where to redistribute that in terms of out there in society. And of course, the problem with this is government often has favorites, just like any other entity. They have economics rule number one. Russia and China are both more market socialist, and I say sort of because they're moving closer to socialist programs. Russia is nationalizing a lot of its industries because of the war. There are still private exchanges between smaller businesses. China is essentially the Chinese Communist Party is co-opting a lot of businesses out there. Any major business is becoming a state-owned enterprise of the People's Republic of China. When this works well, and I put "well" in quotes because it's still not as economically viable as it should be, is when you get something like Germany, which is on the lighter end of the market socialist scale. Okay. Finally, socialism. Real socialism is where the government essentially owns all factors of production. Households and businesses are part of the government. They enforce pure equality and egalitarianism, and you promote something called import substitution, where everything is essentially, you don't want to trade with other countries because it hurts local industries. So they promote import substitution, where you rely, everything you do is a reliance on domestic production. Okay. We don't want to trade with outside entities because outside entities get the benefits, not whatever happens inside of the country. By the way, import substitution usually makes things worse within a country. Russia and China are basically moving this direction where the public sector is the decision maker for everything. There is no purely socialist government on the planet. The closest thing is going to be North Korea. But like any other socialist governments, markets don't simply disappear. The private sector ends up going into the black market. And so markets still exist and are still free. They're just illegal. And if you're in a place like North Korea, that can get you jailed or killed. But in a place like Cuba, where they have a more socialist and it's becoming more market socialist system, black market thrives, and the government just more and more and more turns its head and says, "I don't see you. You don't exist." Okay, so those are the different types of mixed market economies. How would you put them on a spectrum? Nigeria is so chaotic that it would be considered closest to laissez-faire. Government doesn't really run things very well. U.S., Mexico, and is more neoliberal. UK is pretty much more welfare capitalist. Russia, then China, much more under government control with market socialism.